Broadcasting. 1, 2, 3. Welcome. Digital-Roundtable is on today. It's March 17th. It is a beautiful day in the capital of Austin, Texas. 72 degrees, clear skies. I understand there's a little bit of north weather coming down, and apparently it snowed a little bit in Amarillo last night, which is just 8 hours in Texas. So we got all this multimodal weather going on in Texas. Let's start the show by asking our Dr. John Sibley Butler to get us with the tune in guitar. John, are you ready?
Peace of mind, where's the good times that we should be sharing? Now we can find all the answers in the good times we've had.
Oh, wow. That's a new tune, John. John, this is a good one. I like it. How are you doing today?
I am doing just fine. Looking at how everything is going, interesting stuff. I think that we look at all of the outcomes of the pandemic and all of the outcomes of the snow and ice that we had in Austin, and in the news in Austin now we really know who the essential workers are. So there's a lot of emphasis there. There's a lot of emphasis on business models. I was in conversation with realtors this morning about what's going to happen to downtown real estate. But it's a great day in Austin, Texas. I'm preparing for my member golf tournament. I'm on spring break. And I saw that Texas A&M told them to come back on Monday, a 3-day break. We're having the traditional week. So it's just an interesting year when we consider all the things that's happening.
Yeah, absolutely. Llewelyn, how are you, sir?
Very well, thank you. All is well here. It's St. Patrick's Day, but there seems to be a lack of the normal hijinks. Some people are wearing the green, but things are subdued. In the time of pandemic, things are subdued. And of course, the pubs here some of them are open, but in a very restricted way. And people are restricting themselves. So I think there will be delayed appetite for the good stuff of Ireland.
So Llewelyn, are you Irish?
No, not at all. But I did spend many years. I was the American coordinator for an Irish think tank. They call them a summer school. It's like a Renaissance weekend. And so 20, 30 times I went, must be about 30, because I went to Ireland and made many friends and learned a great deal about Ireland, met all of the Irish prime ministers during that period, and the president, Mary Robinson, who was quite famous, Robinson, and got a sort of organic feeling for Ireland, which I might not have gotten otherwise. I had been previously as a visitor, but if you're part of something, and I rather like the same time next year feeling of seeing the same people. Unfortunately, our particular think tank is no longer going, but there are others. It's a wonderful way to start getting to grips with Ireland. Yeah. The only thing you don't want to do in Ireland is take over Irish Americans, because Ireland is not Irish enough for Irish Americans. They are woefully disappointed. I took one fellow, I don't make a word of this up, who was covered from head to toe in tweed. I think he had tweed socks, tweed underwear. And my Irish friend said, "What's your man wearing?" And I said, "You shut up. He thinks he's gone native. You just don't say anything. Or say very nice tweed. Don't say any more." And then another chap who went over, he didn't think the Irish coffee was properly made. And it's very difficult. And then, of course, Ireland is a gloriously upside down place. That's what makes Ireland, Ireland. And I went in the Northwest, where the Irish had had a terrible history with the British landlords, with Cornwallis knocking them about after the rebellion, etc. And then the Black and Tans, these ill-trained British troops after the First World War, many of them just teenagers. And I had explained all this history to my Irish-American friend, and we went in a pub on the way back for a drink, and the publican said to me, "How's the weather over there?" And I knew he meant in London. I just knew that. And I said, no, I'm not English anymore. I live in America, been there for many, many years. And he threw his arms around me and he said, "God bless you, you haven't lost your accent." This had my Irish friend so totally confused. He said, "But the British hated you." I said, "Yeah, but they also loved you." Can see that. It's more complex. Everything is more complex than it seems. There's a story which I think sums up the entire country, which is the old farmer who took a pig to market to sell it. And afterwards, when he was having his Guinness and a pipe, he said, when his friend asked him, "How did the sale go?" He said, ah, it didn't get what it should, but then I never thought it would. So that's Ireland. But I have seen the most amazing transfer. Ireland from being essentially, in some ways, almost medieval, church dominated. When I started going to I took a friend who worked for me, Jack Cushman, later he was at the New York Times, who was big on the internet, and he gave a talk on the internet, and these people looked at him blankly. They didn't know what the hell he was talking about. 3 years later, the internet exploded massively in Ireland. And what it really was not an explosion of the internet, so much of a utilization of a resource they had, which was educated women. It started with technical publishers who wanted footnotes, which they couldn't get done accurately or enthusiastically in the US, but these women were then American Express started doing its billing, and it was off. And now Galway is one of the internet capitals of the world, one of the computer capitals, and never have I seen anything go so fast. And there was a great lesson in this for emerging economies. The Irish thought they needed roads and railroads and bridges and ports. They didn't. They could export by wire, and it changed everything. And there's a lesson in that. And it will make you, Andres, feel very happy because, by God, when 5G gets to Ireland, the ferries will be the
Absolutely. Ron Zimmer, how are you, sir?
Great to join you again. Always wonderful to be chatting with you and to be a part of this good event. Yeah, CABA, of course, is very focused on intelligent buildings, connected homes, all things integrated within the building sector, and we've been very active in Ireland, which is very appropriate to talk about on St. Paddy's Day. I've had the pleasure to be there to visit, and was, of course, obviously impressed, not the least of which my tour of the Guinness pub factory. I'm certified to pour the right Guinness. Anyway, the opportunity, though, I think that's very appropriate because CABA is an international trade association, and our members are around the world. We work with 380 plus members and over 29,000 industry professionals in Ireland and all over the world. So it's a pleasure to be here and maybe share some of our research with your listeners.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks for being here. Ron just shared, he's the president and CEO of the Continental Automated Building Association. And CABA has been around at least for 24 years, and Ron has been in charge for longer. Ron, you are in Canada, correct?
Yes, that's a good thing and a bad thing. It's a good thing, I would say, because of the Canadian dollar for the organization. But the snow, we've really become truly a virtual organization with the pandemic. As I now have the largest oak desk I've ever had in my life. I'm sitting on my dining room table here, just in front of it, and I've got more space than I've ever had. to do my work. But it's a sign of what a lot of companies and people are going through right now. And the new normal, I'm sure we will talk about that. That new normal is going to be different from what we were all used to.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Well, welcome
And
again.
I should say CABA is actually around about 31 years. And you're right, I've been here about 24 years, so haven't been around. It just feels like 31 sometimes for me, Andreas.
So let me switch to, welcome again. Let me switch to the news that we kind of keep track of. So COVID deaths are sort of slowing down a bit. We're still in the 533,000 number. The cases are also somewhat slowing down. So we're at 29,319,000. The vaccines has increased dramatically. We're doing about 18 million per week. So we're about 111 million right now. And rumor has it, as I've heard, that the president wants everybody to be vaccinated by the end of May. So that would be fantastic. Maybe everything should be back by summer. Along with 5G, everything will be peachy keen and full of honey. There seems to be still a little bit of worry about inflation. The stock market is kind of trading sideways. All the indices are trading sideways. There seems to be a big rotation going on. Crude oil, unfortunately, is going through the roof. It's already at 65.30 cents. It went up another $1.12 since last week. So it's gone up almost $5 in 5 weeks. $1 a week kind of thing. Price of gas in Greater Austin, which should be a great place to buy gas, is now $2.49. I am missing my $1.89 gallon of gas. Gas keeps going up. It went up 14 cents last week. This is not a good thing. Inflation is not a good. Prices of gas and oil going up is not a good thing in general. They need to be controlled and monitored. So we'll see what happens. Jobs things seem to be coming back. 2 states have opened up 100%. Texas and Mississippi, Alaska also opened up before. So, John, what do you think is happening? Are we turning the corner here? Is there a relapse in the way, or are we skating free after spring break?
Well, let's talk about the virus first of all. I think that certainly we're turning the corner, but around the corner, we don't want to fumble the football, so to speak, on the 2-yard line. I think there's an interesting dynamic now between the expectation flowing toward us and an almost hurry up kind of attitude getting to the finish line. So I think that it is still here, and the scientists tell me that we really have to be careful, and I think we do have to be careful. But certainly in terms of the perception of people, whether things are opening up, how they feel about the future, we feel that we're going to have a great future. We feel that Memorial Stadium will be full when the Longhorns play football, and we feel these things. If we look at the economy, I think it's unprecedented for America now to think about interest rates and where we're going, because the new business models would change lots of things. We know that when you increase interest rates, that is at the federal level, then that is bad for business, but is great for Americans. I would love to have an interest rate of 10% so I can put my money in the bank and get 10% interest. So they're going to have to balance this idea of increasing interest rates on the one hand, and the economy that we really don't know what it will look like in the future. I think for the first time in a long time, we will see a serious renegotiation of how we do business in America. As I like to ask, will the University of Texas send me to the Academy of Management for a big meeting and pay my hotel? We do millions of that for faculty members, or will we do it online? And I think that all of these things are converging to produce an uncertainty about the future. On the other hand, what is certain is the stock market. That is, as long as we have nowhere to put our money, as long as we begin to understand or don't understand the uncertainty of new business models, then the stock market will continue to thrive. But look, the biggest thing I think in the economy is the unknown about the business models. What will a restaurant look like? What will a high school look like? What will a university look like? What will a hotel look like? Can you imagine all of the dollars that's spent for the different conventions that we have? What will Mardi Gras look like in the future? What about South by Southwest? Well, if I'm a betting man, I would say that Americans forget very, very fast. We're like a defensive back on a football team that's been beaten 3 or 4 times. They must forget right away. So we might put our bet into the forgetness of Americans, but it's certainly a place we haven't been in a long time. And remember, at the end of the last pandemic, we didn't have all the technologies to change the business models. We literally went back to what we were doing. But we ask now, what would it be like?
Yeah. Yeah. Ron, I want to go. Ron, what's your take? Is COVID destroy the building industry, the smart home thing, or is it getting better, faster? Tell us what's happening. What is it looking like? And are there any new standards because of COVID with air handling of buildings? And where is this taking us?
Yeah, just to build, that's a great question, and one that we and to build on what John just said, it's and what I alluded to, this new normal. In some cases, we will go back to things that were fairly normal, the way we used to remember things, but there are many things that won't. And if you look at the build sectors, which is an area that we actually focus on, that's going to be very different. We just completed, Andreas, as you may know, as one of our great members, and is that we just completed a major piece of research that our CABA board of directors, we're governed by a very prestigious board, and they asked us to launch on May 29th of last year a specific research project, which wasn't planned, but to look at intelligent buildings and COVID-19. So we did that, and we had unprecedented support from our industry to help fund it. And we commissioned through an RFP, Frost & Sullivan, to undertake the research. And that was really just completed recently. Well, we did it in 3 modules, in fact, so that we could get the results out more quickly. In fact, your listeners can go to CABA.org, CABA.org, and download the executive summary of that report and module 1. We're giving that away. There's 22 firms, organizations that help fund it, and they get the full research. In any case, one of the things that I thought was very illuminating, and we fully suspect, is that the build sector, when this massive movement around the world of people moving to home office kind of situation, which was unprecedented in our times, leaving many major centers and cities almost vacant, and the impact on not just the building, the cities themselves, on transportation, on urban transit. So there's a lot of things that were impacted on. And the reality now is that, the good money that's betting is that many of those people will come back to their offices, but not to the level, both in terms of the overall numbers, and in many cases it may only be 1 or 2 days a week with an expectation. So that's one thing. The second thing, which I think was very clear, is that the industry, and this, if there's anything good, and there was really not much good about a pandemic, worldwide pandemic, but it really showed that the buildings that we have today, which are very functional, 6.4 million commercial buildings in Canada, US, very functional. But the fact is that many of them are what we call in our world dumb buildings, very functional, lighting systems not connected to the HVAC systems, not connected to the security life safety systems there. So now, as the industry looks to say, how do we open our buildings and make them safe for our employees and our our customers, people visit an airport, a hospital, shopping mall, or a commercial office. So, and that's where technology and our research really tried to showcase to say, hey, we have a lot of great technology, and it's not all about technology. There's many things you can do that don't require technology, but ultimately, if you have things like ultraviolet light, which we've had, if we had things like better filtration systems or HVAC systems, sensors to check, people, biometrics to, do we have to touch things really? Like, let's go more touchless. Like, do we have to touch a button in an elevator? In a washroom, do we have to touch things, doors? And so basically, we can take the temperature of people. We can tell if people have masks or they're coming in, if they're not wearing masks and they're supposed to be. So those are things that that we really have technology here today that can be utilized. And so the message is to builders, developers, architects, engineers, as we move to open the buildings, as we retrofit, as we recommission the new build, the greenfields, we need to really take a look at how do we make our buildings safe and functional, and under this new reality of spacing, social distancing, to be able to do that in a way that actually helps the economy open up. And not the least of which, Andreas, as you know, lawsuits. We want to avoid, whether you're leasing a building, owning a building, you want to avoid class action lawsuits. So these are things, and we gave almost a prescription of how this can be done. And again, some company, in fact, there's a number of great companies, the JLLs and other CBREs and others who are very active, very saying we're going to do a lot to make our buildings safe around the world as much as we can, and for the people that lease that we operate the buildings for. And that's, I think, I mean, there's many great things that I could spend the whole session on, but in fact, there's even presentations in our presentation sections for other conferences that I'm on. I'm speaking next week in Australia, sharing some of our research at a Smart Buildings conference. But I think that's it. And the last thing I'll just end with, because you may want to allude to it later, is smart cities. COVID-19 and this pandemic and smart buildings really can be a part of that smart cities movement. You're in one of them. You're in Austin is one of the truly smart cities of the world, and but not every city is, and not every city has a plan. So this is an opportunity, I think, for cities to say, hey, we can use again, technology and other things to put together a plan to create this as we open up. And we will open up. I think John's point is very accurate. We will open up in some cases, some countries faster, like US will be, I think, one you're on track to have everyone vaccinated and have herd immunity faster than most countries in the world. And hopefully at that point, you can spread the goodwill to other countries.
Let me ask a follow-up question real fast. I find it very interesting. Maybe you're suggesting that we have an FDA for buildings, which in turn will improve the inability for people to transport viruses or whatever have you. We know, for example, that the flu has almost disappeared because of our willingness to wear masks and be aware of not touching things. So you're suggesting then a policy, and Ron, I want to take credit for that if this is done, a policy, much like the FDA, that when a building is built, that the expectations now of the building, we meet all of the things that would keep humans safe, and behind that would be the whole idea of lawsuits. So therefore, the transformation of the FDA, which of course keeps us safe, quote unquote, from certain kinds of drugs, etc., will move for the first time to building. It will go beyond the traditional building codes, which for the most part were about water safety and having the right electricity and hookup, to all of a sudden,
fire safety,
keeping humans safe.
Yes. And there's a lot of corollaries to this. So you're actually, you're on a track which we may not reach, but industry itself is doing this. So there's a credit's due. Delos, which is on our board of directors, have the founder, Paul. He spoke at our last Intelligibility Council meeting. Great presentation, all recorded. People can listen to him. But they were the founders of the International Well Buildings Institute. And in fact, some people would know that Rick Ferdisi, who did his magic over at the U.S. Green Building Council, moved over to head this group up, and he's doing his magic again. But the point is that they have really been pushing forward and bringing forward some amazing standards and certifications to make buildings well. And of course, this is a great example of why you would want to do that. So they've got great traction. You've seen national ads, actually, international ads from some superstars that are supporting this movement. So industry is doing it. Whether we get to that point, and it's a double-edged sword. I know there's a lot of people say, do we need regulation? Do we need legislation? Maybe we do, but so we'll see where that one goes. But the nice thing is, I think the industry is starting to understand that, and there'll be a demand, actually, because people will vote by whether they go into a shopping center or a building, employees, and say, yeah, it's not safe. I don't feel good.
Right. Llewelyn, chime in.
Well, of course, first thing I'd like to say, going back to what Johnny said about inflation, we have inflation in one sector, the housing sector. In your city of Austin, houses are selling at an enormous premium. A $300,000 house has a premium of about $200,000 on it. That is inflation. And
Well,
inflation.
I just think that's the root of economics. I mean, I don't think it's inflation.
Inflation, because we aren't building enough houses, which is largely a social problem, because we put too much of our many places that should have new housing, such as apartment buildings in the suburbs. It's not happening. However, I'm so glad to hear Ron talking about clean buildings in the way he is. At the beginning of the pandemic, I did some reporting and made some talks on the idea of scrubbing the air, and looked at various air scrubbing systems, a plasma, a ultraviolet light, and then a mist of hydroperoxide, I think it is. There are various ways, but it seems to me that if, say, restaurants and hotels had a sign outside which said basically clean air, the way they now have in the third world air conditioning in very hot countries that don't have much air conditioning, it's a big selling point. And that seems like the future. But I'd also like to ask Ron about the real purposes behind CABA, which is reducing pollution and energy consumption and removing the enormous amount of heat which buildings are dumping into congested cities. How's that coming? And how do we make that sexy? It's very easy to say, hey, we're going to go out and we're going to build 1 billion turbines and we're going to do this and we're going to take the desert and cover it. But it's much harder to look at a city and say, we're going to re-engineer these buildings and there's going to be an economic advantage at the end. And it's very perilous. I'm speaking to you from an extraordinary building. It is the old Fruit of the Loom headquarters in Rhode Island. It was a huge mill. It's a massive, beautiful building. And recently they replaced the double glazed windows. Well, of course, because of what it is, these are not windows you buy at the Home Depot. They are clearly specially made. And they replaced them. But they replaced them with the cheapest they could have made, and they're failing. And the result is they are using more natural gas now to heat this place than they did heretofore, which gets us, Johnny, into a big American problem. The cost of doing things cheaply is so damned expensive.
Well, okay.
Go ahead, Ron.
Well, I just you raise another key part, and we didn't set this up, Andreas. But it was a perfect segue into the second piece of research that we did was intelligent buildings and energy management systems, and we did that because to your point and question is that the energy usage and many people know this, that about 40% of all energy consumed in North America is from the build sector. Okay, that's all buildings. So when you think of that, it's the highest. Actually, it's higher than transportation. It's higher than manufacturing. It's the highest. So if you want to tackle, you say, well, how do we reduce our energy? Well, you want to tackle that sector. So that's number one. And actually, I think the government's DOE and EPA, understand that, and a lot of good work has been done over the last number of years in this area. But it's changing so dramatically, and some people really get this, like they really understand it, and understand that if they can reduce their energy costs. Incidentally, that 40% does not include the construction costs. When you think of the cost, the energy used to produce cement, concrete, or steel, carpet, whatever, it's a huge cost to the amount of energy, CO2, and if we want to have a sustainable world, we want to work to battle climate change and CO2 reduction. We really must address this. And this is why this research looked at what's happening 2 years out, and there's some dramatic changes coming, and the utilities are at the forefront of much of that. Because they understand that the renewables is going to explode, and of course you're the new president, and the commitments that have been made. I think you're going to see some even more dramatic movement in this area. Electric vehicles, massive change. So there's a lot of things that are going to change. We think of the utilities, and Andreas, I know you're much more an expert on this than I am in terms of smart grid and the old way. It's unidirectional. Like you produced it, you had a transmission system, you had a distribution system, and then it went into the build sector one way. Now it's moving to a two-way system, and the renewables, whether it's solar, wind, geothermal, whatever, microgrids are coming on. Battery storage is improving so dramatically. So all of these things will allow for this microgrid, or actually to feed in tariffs where you're having energy produced, and there's almost theoretically all buildings could be net energy producers, not just zero net energy. It could be now feasibly.
I coined that term, Ron, in 2011. I call it positive energy buildings.
Yes, and that's actually starting to happen, but we're at the forefront of that. But I think what it'll start, you'll see it more on campuses, like whether it's the Microsoft campus, one of our board members, or universities are classic examples of where this can really, really work well. And we're starting to see it. And that's where it's part of smart city effort as well. But I think to your point, there's some dramatic changes that have happened. So we are starting to move that way. I think that projections, and again, Andreas, you could probably throw better numbers than I can, but the projections for the future are going to be very dramatic in terms of the shift from our traditional ways of generating energy to the whether it be wind, solar, and there's legislation, California, as we all know, or should know, that California has already in its law, new home construction must have photovoltaic solar, and that's the law. So governments are going to, and part of it is the push to meet their climate change objectives. Coming back to
hold your questions. Let me take 10 seconds here to plug our annual event real quick. Hopefully you can see my screen. So the Digital 360 Summit is coming up. It's going to be face-to-face. Ron Zimmer is driving the Smart Buildings and Infrastructure session. We will have a keynote. We will have a great panel. This year's event is going to be about 100 speakers, 400 companies. We'll have 2 awards, 1 showcase, roughly 1,000 attendees, 20 keynotes, 14 panels. And the verticals on, digitizing industry, water, energy, telecom, construction, buildings, wastewater, smart factories, software, networks and artificial intelligence and software in general. So this is going to be a great place to come and see that happen. Texas State is actually going to be powered by green energy. I just got the approval to come up with a project, and so I'll be given the land. We're going to do solar photovoltaic, and we're going to have Texas State 100% green by 2022. How's that?
That's fantastic. And I know your group, Andreas, and your effort to, and I'll come back to, the points that were made earlier, that a big part is education and information.
Yeah.
We don't know what so many people in the industry have builders and developers, for example, it's like, I don't know what I don't know. So unless they actually are educated to not do it the way, like build a building cheap, build it low bid, low cost, like the lowest bid wins, and the people on the capex side are building it with commissions and incentives to value engineer some of this great technology that will, reduce energy over the life cycle of that building, and it may be owner operated building, and they don't care because it's coming out of another pocket later on. The capex and OpEx.
Clearly, go ahead, guys.
Ron, I'm very impressed with the research being done in Canada. I followed it through a great colleague of mine, Laura Kilcrease, who was one of the founders of the movement of Austin. She is one of the person who really did the blueprint for Austin, Texas. She was our first director of the Austin Technology Incubator, and I was director of IC Square, and we worked together to change Austin's and Continental's model. But let me just ask you this. So I follow Laura, and I follow what you guys are doing. I'm really impressed with all of the research you're doing that's related to Llewelyn's favorite topic, which is hydrogen. I'm very impressed with how your research agenda has integrated all of the future technologies. And my question is there you have more of a national orientation? I think Laura is part of that, to bring all the research and put it to commercialization. And it looks like to me that Canada has always been great, but it's really becoming one of the focus of providing research in an organized way rather than in a haphazard way to solve a problem.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that. I know we're based in Canada, but and the research we do is worldwide. So I would say there's amazing research which we follow. We had over 200 pieces of research from all over the world. European Union does amazing research. Asia, even South America. There's some amazing research which is being done, and applied research. Universities. Oh my God! Some of the great research that universities do. The national labs that, for example, in the U.S., amazing. Private sector collaborating with in many cases. I think one of the things that I'm seeing more than ever before, historically, and we come back to 23 years ago on the connected home, or that time home automation. We had the X10 clapper, which was a leading technology and actually a forefront of where we are today. The forefront of voice recognition and how we've moved the smart home into, and a connected home into how voice recognition is the new interface. All that research that companies like Google, Amazon, Apple have done has moved the yardstick, have moved the needle, so that it's not just the wealthy and the richest buildings and the wealthiest that could afford this. It's now the middle class. It's now affordable, and the opportunity. Not that we've solved all the problems. We still have interoperability problems. We're working on that. We have cybersecurity issues that we have to deal with, privacy issues that are still the number 1, 2 reasons why people don't buy connected home products. And we just finished, Andreas, I snuck in another research project that we just did on privacy and cybersecurity. Sorry about that. Shameless plug.
Yeah.
But anyway, but coming back to your point, so research is everywhere. Part of our role as an international association is to highlight that. We are a knowledge center. We will gather and share that research because sometimes, John, there's great research that is being done in Austin. I know there is at universities and elsewhere, and it's kind of a hidden gem. And unless we can make that known to the industry, and this I'll come back to at Andreas's event, and this webinar today is to help educate and inform people. If we can do that, we can help move the yardsticks and get more touchdowns and win the football game, because our world needs it.
I think that Ron you touched on, I think, the large problem in the entire building, which I've been looking at the building well for a long time, and that is the owner-operator. I know about 5 people, I think it is 5, I was trying to count them up while you were talking, who own buildings, and they're not interested in what I have to say about conservation, etc. 1, they're not very sophisticated. 2, they pass through all their costs. They pass through heating, they pass through electric, ergo they pass through air conditioning. Now, I think you have a company that owns a lot of buildings where provides some of these things, you've got a very easy sale. But if you go to the owner-operator, who's often a fairly ornery person, and they're not interested. We looked at this way back during the energy crisis when first time it was decided that every building could be a power plant. Well, we haven't made much progress there. When we think of the progress we've made everywhere else in energy, we really haven't made much progress in terms of turning large buildings into power plants because of a huge number of hurdles, not the least the owner-operator, but also state indifference, city indifference, or conflicting ambitions. A lot of this sounds to me like district heating. I don't know if any of you remember district heating. But this
Europe is very big on,
much more efficient to heat the city centrally, and it works. You can see the steam in New York, and works in parts of Scandinavia. But by and large, district heating failed. There was one in London. They pumped the hot water from Battersea Power Plant to Dolphin Square across the river, and that was hailed as revolutionary. But then they closed down Battersea Power Plant, so they had to put in a local boiler. How are you going to tackle the owner-operator?
Through education and through the typical curve of adoption, where you have the early adopters and then the chasm, and then we leap the chasm, and then we work up to, and then eventually the laggards.
When you say education, there are 2 tools in education: incentive and punishment. Which one do you think will be most effective?
To certain segments, you'll take the incentive side, in other words, to show the life cycle cost and the value proposition of how they can actually generate, 30 to anywhere from 30 to 40%. And I will say this: technology is not the only way you can save energy. If you have an older building and it needs, you got to talk about windows. It needs the right type of windows. There's cracks. It needs caulking. It needs insulation. The building envelope is terrible. Like it doesn't make sense then to put a system in that is just still you're leaking energy. Okay. But here's one of the reasons, and I'll talk about research, John. Joseph Allen, amazing man, amazing speaker out of Harvard. He, Andreas, if you can ever get him as a speaker, he's amazing. Anyway, they've done some amazing research, and one of the things that they showed very clearly, and he communicates wherever he can, is that in a typical commercial office building, of that. Here's a test. See who knows this. The energy costs. What is the average energy cost of a typical, 10-story commercial building of 100%? What percent?
10%.
All right, 10. Anyway, you each want to take a shot at?
22.
All right. This is overall. Now think of the overall costs. Maybe this up, not just the operating costs, the overall costs of operating that building full of people. There's a little tip.
Oh wow! I'll take it up to 40. 45%.
No, it's actually 1%, the
1%.
overall cost.
Oh, wow.
So now, if you're still spending $5 million and you can save 30% of that, that's not something to sneeze at. So,
Right.
but here's the overall cost to operate a building is 10%, of which 1% is energy. 90% of that cost of that owner operator building is the people costs, the salaries and benefits. So we have kind of tackled it in the wrong way in some respect. This is what Joseph Valla, I'm just repeating what his beliefs are, and his research is showing, is that we really have to show that owner operator that you can lease a building much better if you can show whoever's going to lease the building, or if it's owner operator, that if you can actually, if you think about the people, coming back to COVID-19, make the building safe, healthy, the wellness, the productivity, you're going to have less sick days, less absenteeism, less complaints to the landlord or the facility manager. That's where the focus needs to be, not to discount energy. Absolutely. And we can show a great business case. So there's a holistic view that you have to take to the building in a way that actually shows that you can win in many different ways, and give the building a brain, have the nervous system, have the ability to have the people in there feeling safe, comfortable, they're looked after, they're cared for, they're going to believe more strongly. You're going to have employee retention. You're not going to lose employees. The millennials are very fickle. They don't like the building. They'll say, I don't care. I'm going somewhere else. And in your city or Austin, they can go right down the street and work. That's why the high tech companies are building these beautiful buildings that have got everything that you never want. You never want to leave the building. That's what they want.
Right. So now you're including the building. Before that, it was just the exercise. So you remember firms said, okay, we need to cut back on health insurance, so we want everybody to exercise to get in shape. So they develop exercise programs in the context of the workday. Now, as we said earlier, you're including the building, not only the exercise of the people, but also the building itself, that reduces the cost of absenteeism because of health issues and those kinds of things.
Right. If the CO2 and oxygen levels are just perfect, if the lighting is just perfect, if the oxygen level, the air exchange is just perfect, your people are going to be healthier, happier, and you're going to win on the productivity. The productivity gains just come back to that 90%, just a couple percentage points is huge. And the research that Harvard has done has shown this. And we actually had a productivity project actually fully funded, over $200,000, and then COVID hit. And well, that's on the shelf now because we have to wait to see the new normal. Productivity just kind of shifted to the suburbs. But Andreas, are you seeing that as well? Because you've been involved on that front as well.
I think that you are basically sharing the beginnings of what I see. Changes on standards and requirements for buildings. I think that there's going to be, some kind of, just like we had LEED buildings and this and that, this whole notion that John was articulating, the FDA getting involved. Somehow buildings and their air filtering system, we have always delegated this stuff to sort of the market in general. Best product will win, don't worry about it, things will. And I think we need to really create better requirements, better code to make all these buildings, which need to be retrofitted, much better buildings, right? And so this is I think this is how the owner operator gets incentives to participate.
Yeah, that comes back to, do we regulate, and building code is a big one, and we've seen it work, whether it's fire and life safety, there's so many codes that we already have. And so that's coming, and maybe not coming fast enough, because I'll come back to, our world really needs to make some major changes, and that's throughout the full society. Otherwise, we will leave our children and grandchildren not a very good world to grow up in. And there'll be some dramatic socioeconomic shifts that'll be devastating to those, the haves and the have-nots who are starving.
Do you hear, Ron, do you hear at all the notion of commercial buildings being retrofitted to be half living, half office? Do you hear that from JLL or CBRE or any of those guys? I mean, if people are not gonna come back to work, what are they gonna do with all those buildings?
Yes, that's we are hearing, and it's going to there's going to be a lot of repurposing. Shopping malls is a great example. That's that actually was shifting already. And what do you do with these massive shopping malls? Because the whole, if you know, the
Right.
whole retail has been turned on its head by what was already happening with online shopping, and now it's just gone, you know, on steroids. So there will be more mixed use. You know, combination of
Yeah.
commercial, office, and yeah, mixed use. So yeah, it'll be interesting because a lot of those big players are trying to figure it out. It's not just in the U.S. or Canada. It's around the world. There. And in some cases we can learn. We've also said to our industry, let's learn. Some of the countries you mentioned, Ireland, you know, Europe, actually, you know, Spain, they've some cases they're kind of ahead of the curve sometimes in a bad way. And we hear about the third wave coming now. So we can learn from what they're doing, and so best practices, because a lot of buildings, I mean, yeah, there, you know, you have KNX as a standard in Europe, and not so much in you know, we have more BACnet and Modbus and now with you know, middleware software like Niagara product from Tritium, and you know, we can now connect disparate systems, which is always a big problem. But we can learn from what's happening in United Arab Emirates, you know, Dubai. They're putting together some amazing buildings and facilities, and they have a lot of dumb buildings too. I'm just saying they're not all smart.
They do. So Ron, real quick, give me the 5 smartest buildings in the world. Where are they?
Wow, good one. I always use now it's one time it was the prototype was the Edge building in Amsterdam. So the Edge building is probably still one of the smartest, most sustainable buildings. If you go to YouTube and just go the Edge building and search, it'll come up. There's a couple of short videos really to show you what a building can be and what they found. Just a little corollary here. Their employee retention went way up. This is a Deloitte building now. And they also found that when the openings came up, they actually have the highest amount of Deloitte employees want to move to that building. I'll come back to how can your building be an asset? Keep your smart people attractive, smartest, brightest. The McDonald's headquarters in Chicago. That's a JLL project with Siemens and other companies. Amazing building that's been put up there. Oh, the one in Fort Worth. We just profiled it on our Intelligent Building Council meeting. There's a hotel. Not many people, maybe you're aware of it because it's just around the corner. It's a Marriott hotel. And I can't think of the full name, but it's an old hotel, a historic landmark, and they retrofitted it. It's now one of the most intelligent hotels in the world. And here's the kicker: it's a virtually low voltage, all low voltage, power over Ethernet. Battery storage. Think of it with elevators, and so they basically, I think the only power they have is for electric razors that still plug in for the customers in the rooms. That's it. So that's another one. But there are many great examples, throughout the U.S. and Canada and in the world. But still, you have to be careful because there's the prototype. And I always say, you don't have to be 100%. You don't have to be like those buildings. If you just did lighting, please, if everybody just did lighting, the payback, the ROI is just a little, not more than 2 years, sometimes maybe a year, the payback on lighting controls. And I always say, if you just do nothing else, tackle that one, and you already have a smart building underway. So
you want to do the products. I mean, you want to do the buildings, what we did, the products. If we go back and look at the all of the measurements of what we call efficiency for products. If you look at Peter Drucker and how he wrote about how Japan came with a much better car, such that when I built my 1955 Chevrolet and I go down to Western Auto, I might find a part, have to go through 15 of the same pieces, but they're not all metrically the same.
Yeah.
So you want to do to buildings,
Yeah.
what we did to products years ago to make them more efficient, to make them payable in the future, and get all the metrics.
More modular.
Yes, great.
What's
Yeah.
coming too is I know we're getting to the end of the time here. I just want to quickly mention that artificial intelligence is we're on the forefront. We're just scratching the surface there in the building sector. So when you get a predictive maintenance diagnostics, so we can tell when a motor is failing and not being energy efficient, we can actually order the part. It can be diagnosed. And actually a part could be ordered, and then the facility manager just gets a little note saying, yes, you have to have somebody check that out. In fact, I've already ordered the part. I've arranged for the service call.
Yeah.
That's where we're going. And 5G, as was mentioned earlier, it's just going to put everything on steroids. But we need to give our buildings a brain so that it starts to understand and do more things intuitively for us. And that brings the value out. And then maybe the builders, once they hear their competitors are doing this, the laggards will slowly climb on board.
Let me go to Llewelyn for final thoughts. Llewelyn, final thoughts on smart buildings. Where is this going?
You have to dream up the incentives. I think education is a splendid thing, but people are very resistant to simply doing the right thing, even if you tell them and explain to them why it is the right thing. But if there is economic incentive or social pressure, part of the adoption of the electric vehicle was the yuppies liked them. It was morally superior long before as many people bought them as are buying them now. And if you can somehow tell people that a building is morally superior, they may be more inclined to rent space in it, to occupy it, etc. And you can get a movement going that way. But I don't think it's an easy sell by any means. I think it's an easy sell in big, sophisticated cities with big, sophisticated real estate owners. I think it's a lot harder when you get to the 15, 20-story building that somebody inherited from their father. I know that instance. Very famous tenant, but no interest in doing anything except charging the tenant more money. So it's a sort of perfect storm of disinclination.
Yeah, it's so true. So true.
Well, I see it as a continuing evolution of buildings. I can remember, if you go back and look at all the sociology of building, that great research, then revolving doors was a big thing for building. Elevators, big thing for building. Escalators were big things for buildings. So if you look at what we call technology in society that comes out of the sociology literature and how it affects people, at one time people would say, well, the door now has a revolving door. And it's much more pleasing to it. We now have an elevator. It's much more pleasing. No more elevators. We have escalators. It's much more pleasing. So I think if we look at the continued technology addition to buildings, then we see this as a natural evolution of a building. Yeah. Llewelyn is right. You must have a reason, a good reason to move from a building without an escalator to one with an escalator. So what's the value?
Also, if I can interrupt, you also have to overcome the sentimentality that attaches to buildings. The National Press Building in Washington, of course, journalists are probably the worst example. We liked it when it was ramshackle and broken down. They rebuilt it, and now we have fewer tenants, and we like it less. When I moved, I worked at the newspaper called the Washington Post, and we moved into a brand new wing. Oh, it was color coded. It was this. It took us about 4 days to trash it and return it to the kind of deshabille which we found congenial.
We only fall in love with baseball parks in America. we blow up.
You know that you're
Don't mess
not
with
speaking my language, but
don't
I'm
mess
listening
with Fenway.
keenly.
Don't mess with Wrigley Field. Don't mess with LSU Tiger Stadium.
That's right.
Or you
Yeah,
tear up the
yeah.
rest of the buildings.
Which
And
now,
how about cricket fields in England?
yeah,
You know,
well, actually, some of
keep
the
the
sports,
broken turnstile. It's always been broken. Why are you going to fix it now?
yeah,
That's communism.
yeah, actually, some of the sports stadiums are now some of the most intelligent
Yeah.
buildings with biometrics. In China, they had, I think, 30,000 people go through, and they picked out a person they wanted, was on the wanted list
Wow.
because of facial recognition.
Yeah,
You can
facial
imagine.
recognition is big
Yeah,
one.
so this is coming. These are things that are coming, and they're good and bad. You get the bad people, but the reality.
Stadia are a huge challenge. For example, if the electric fails and people die in a stampede, who is responsible? The stadium, the designer, the electric company. There are so many layers of responsibility in a lodge. Do you build it so you have segmented electric supply so that it's never in the dark and never without fresh air? It's a huge challenge to design.
Oh yeah, yeah, and that's why the new ones are just amazing now. Even the whole wireless, the connectivity, because everybody has their phones, right? But now with COVID-19, how do you keep people safe? So those are things that you're absolutely right. Terrorism, how do you protect people? We haven't even touched on cybersecurity, Andreas. There's always good and bad with everyone, and so sometimes there are some bad people in the world. The good news is that the industry, the companies like AT&T and the Comcasts, the Microsofts with their cloud and Azure, they've worked really hard to make the technology safer.
Yeah.
Having said that, there's still the bad people are always trying to figure a way around it, and they sometimes do. And so that's an area that we're working as an industry as well. We as CABA, and we work with a number of key organizations that are focused on cybersecurity and how do we keep our people, our information safe. So
I'm happy to say in closing here that we're running over a bit, but this is a fantastic conversation. We could go on for another 10 hours. That we are driving at Texas State in this research park that I'm driving now. We're breaking ground on a new building. Is our Smart Buildings and Infrastructure Lab. It's going to be zero energy, zero water, zero waste. I'm going to build 9 buildings like that in 5 years. And we're kind of trying to redefine how buildings are built and the materials and this whole notion of standards and code. And we're working with 10 cities in the corridor, including Austin and San Antonio, to make sure that there's a learning, there's an exchange, that we learn how to build this product. I think that the product of the future needs to be built cheaper, faster, and better, and so that the owner operator will have no excuse. And there's no reason why a smart building should be more expensive than a dumb building.
And they proved that at that hotel. They actually, when they did the number crunching after, so it can be done. Same cost. Yeah. And then OpEx costs go way down. Way down.
That's the key. The OpEx needs to go way down. Anyway, Ron, thank you very much for sharing with us. We will make sure that your research is highlighted in our audience. There's always a follow-up on these recordings. You'll get of it. Johnny, let's play away, and thank you everybody for sharing today. And buildings are the next big trend. Buildings are going to be the next iPhone. It's happening already. It's going to take maybe 5 years, but it's going to be fantastic.
As we're already over, let me jump in and say Winston Churchill said, "We shape buildings, then they shape us." Take us away, Johnny.
Right.
But it ain't no use to sit and wonder why, babe. It don't matter anyhow. And it ain't no use to sit and wonder why, babe. if you don't know by now, when the rooster crows at the break of dawn, look out your window and I'll be gone. You're the reason I'm traveling on. Don't think twice, 'cause it's all right.
Excellent, Johnny.